The more we find out about our ancient ancestors, the more we think that they knew a few things that we've since forgotten. We can see this in their technology. Sure, the technology we use today is more advanced than the technology of 200 years ago, but there's a certain ingenuity about ancient technology that's beyond the comprehension of our modern minds. Let's check some out. You don't have to be a scientist to know that wood rots. Wooden artifacts have a much lower chance of surviving thousands of years for modern-day archaeologists to find them than artifacts made of other materials. That makes this wooden wagon all the more remarkable. It's near complete and was found on the banks of Lake Sivan close to Lishashan village in Armenia. Incredibly, the wagon is almost 4,000 years old. It's one of the oldest wagons in the world, and certainly the best preserved wagon of its kind from its era. Almost a dozen more four-wheeled and two-wheeled wagons were discovered at the same time in December 2017, although none of the others are quite as well preserved as this one. The wagons are entirely made of oak, and would once have had a coating of fabric on the inner surface of the wheels. Aside from their age, the other thing that's surprised experts about the wagons is how small some of them are. It's been speculated that rather than being pulled by horses or oxen, the wagons may have been pulled by people. If so, that would have been back-breaking work for somebody. Westminster Abbey is one of the most famous buildings in the United Kingdom, which isn't a bad achievement considering that it began life as a humble Benedictine monastery in the year 960. Among the many interesting facts about Westminster Abbey is that it contains Britain's oldest surviving door, a door which, legend has it, was once covered in human skin. The abbey was extensively rebuilt and expanded during the reign of King Henry III in the 13th century. The work left little of the original building behind, but the door is thought to be a survivor from earlier 11th century works ordered by Edward the Confessor. It's the entrance to the abbey's cloisters, and was subjected to scientific testing in 2005. The results confirmed that every plank in the door came from the same tree, and that the tree was cut down somewhere around 1030. As such, it's one of only two verified Anglo-Saxon doors still in existence in the UK. The other is the church door of St. Botolph Church in Hadstock, Essex. As for the legends about human skin, they can neither be proven nor disproven. Back when Algeria belonged to the ancient Romans, they built a bathhouse in El Hama town, Kencella province. More than 2,000 years later, the bathhouse is still there, and it's still used by hundreds of people every day. The bathhouse is called Hamam Es Salah, but also has the nickname the Bath of the Righteous. Local folklore says that the water here has therapeutic qualities. Widespread belief in those healing powers is part of the reason that more than 700,000 tourists visit the baths every year. It's not totally accurate to say that everything at the site is exactly as it was when the Romans left it, because it had to be extensively rebuilt after an earthquake in the 14th century. But the majority of the architecture was put back into place exactly the way it had appeared previously, and much of the original structure remains. Today, you'll find the pool surrounded by massage therapists, physiotherapists, and other facilities that wouldn't have been available to the Romans. But aside from that, they're still used in precisely the same way they were 2,000 years ago. Common sense tells you that if you put a new building directly atop an old one, you'll destroy the old building and everything inside it. That doesn't have to be the case. Sometimes the very presence of a newer building can preserve some of the features of the older one. That's why we can still enjoy these beautiful 2,200-year-old mosaics in the ancient Greek city of Zeugma. Today, this part of the world is part of Gaziantep in Turkey. The existence of the mosaics was unknown until their discovery by archaeologists in 2014. The ruins of over 2,000 houses have also been identified during an archaeological project that's been running since 2007, but the mosaics remain the standout find. They underline Zeugma's importance as a trade and cultural center for the Eastern Roman Empire during its peak years. The condition of the mosaics is especially impressive when you hear that the entire area was completely underwater for centuries before the year 2000. Several museums will eventually be built here, although some of the mosaics may be removed and taken elsewhere for preservation and protection purposes. Hayd al-Jazil looks like the setting of a fantasy movie or television show. It wouldn't look out of place if it was used as a set in House of the Dragon, and you wouldn't even need to dress it up to suit the role. Living here is anything but a fantasy. There are still people living in this remote location, perched atop a rock in the desert valley of Wadi Dawan in Yemen. As of late 2022, the population of Hayd al-Jazil is 17. All the houses in the village are made of mud bricks, which are washed away by rain, and so have to be rebuilt every year. Despite that, so long as there's always someone there to maintain them, they can last a very long time. It's thought that the oldest houses in the village have stood for 500 years. Each house is separated from the next by a wooden floor, with some stacks standing 11 stories high and looking extremely precarious. Most of them are ruins. When it isn't raining, it's extremely hot. The town is walled in on both sides by mountains, trapping the heat and keeping out the wind. Hayd al-Jazil will eventually die, but it hasn't happened yet. The Lan Rock Tombs of Fethiye, Turkey are quite a thing to look at, and their story is quite a thing to hear. The tombs were built, so it's said, so that ancient angels had a way of reaching the dead. So much time and effort was put into carving the tombs that they look more like temples. It was a traditional Lycian belief that when people died, they were carried to the afterlife by angel-like creatures with wings. However, this magical process could only happen if the dead were left in a position high up enough for the angels to reach them. This cliffside was deemed to be the perfect place, and so the tombs were carved into it during the 4th century. The cliff is exposed to the elements, so the classical columns and intricate reliefs have been dulled somewhat by the passage of time, but it's still possible to get a sense of how glorious they must have once appeared. It's all window dressing, though. Once you move past the grand entrances and into the actual tombs, they're little more than bare rooms with simple monoliths to display the bodies that once occupied them. What happens if you're living in the desert? You have perishable food in need of storage, and nobody's invented the refrigerator or the freezer yet. You might think that your food is doomed to go off, but it doesn't have to. Not if you know how to build a yakchal. This is an astonishingly clever piece of Persian engineering and dates back more than 2,400 years. The name translates into English as ice pit, which is a descriptive yet slightly inaccurate representation of what a yakchal is. It's not so much an ice pit as an ice house. They would be built out of clay up to a height of 60 feet, and then water would be supplied to them from any nearby source, like a spring or a reservoir. Inside the yakchal, a wind catcher would be fitted, and thus the water would cool. Eventually, it would turn to ice, freezing anything submerged in it. The effects of the desert sun on the exterior walls were nullified by coating them in egg white and goat hair, which almost certainly made them stink, but would have provided an effective barrier against heat. We've just seen one take on ancient refrigeration technology from the ancient world, but here's a different take on the idea from ancient China. It's called a jian, and the oldest example of one discovered so far is more than 2,500 years old. Primarily used as a means of chilling wine and keeping it fresh, jians worked so well that they were still in everyday use in China until the 17th century, meaning the idea could be considered more than 4,000 years ahead of its time. A jian is made of bronze, containing 2 layers with a thin layer of ice between them to keep the contents of the inner layer cool. After looking at this, We're left to conclude that the Chinese people of ancient times were very serious about looking after their wine. We're also left to conclude that whoever came up with this idea was such a genius that nobody could improve on their design for several millennia. All it requires is a constant supply of ice, which is its one shortfall. Sure, the jian works as a refrigerator, but to supply it with ice, you'd also need a freezer. Archimedes is credited with a number of the most incredible inventions of the ancient world, including the Archimedes Screw. While he deserves acclaim and credit for most of his inventions, he has nothing to do with the Archimedes Screw whatsoever. It's been mistakenly associated with him, but all he did was write about an invention that he saw in action when he visited Egypt in the year 234 BCE. He was told by Egyptians that the invention had already existed for some time by then, and that the secret of who came up with the idea had been lost to time. Whoever invented it, it's a remarkable feat of engineering. It's the first water displacement pump in world history, and has been used to pump water from the River Nile. There's even a suggestion that an Archimedes screw was the centerpiece of the irrigation system that fed the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. A possible reference to the existence of such a screw has been identified in an inscription associated with King Sennacherib of Assyria, who lived 500 years before Archimedes was born. How have we forgotten the name of such an important inventor, one who came up with a concept that's still used all over the world today? One of the first things you think when you look at the Lycurgus Cup, a fabulous and beautiful Roman creation from 1,600 years ago, is how beautiful and colorful it is. Your eyes are misleading you though. Technically speaking, it doesn't have a color. The cup was made using a type of dichroic glass, which reflects light particles in different ways depending on how and where you look at it. Shine a light on the glass from directly behind it, and the cup will appear to be green. Do the same thing from in front of it, and it will appear to be red. There's no chance that whoever made the cup wouldn't have been aware of these qualities, and so would have used them to their advantage in the design of the vessel. But it's highly unlikely that they would have understood why the glass behaved in the way that it did. The Lycurgus Cup is singular in form, meaning nothing like it has been found anywhere else across the Roman Empire. That might suggest that the artist had no idea where to look for more glass with the same properties, and the very creation of the cup might have been little more than a happy accident. The Prague Astronomical Clock, also known as the Clock of Orlov, was made in 1410. Nobody knows who made it, but there's quite a chilling legend attached to its creation. Legend has it that the incredibly elaborate clock was made by the hands of a man called Hannes. Prague's city authorities were thrilled with the finished product, but thought that Hannes might devalue its uniqueness by making another clock for another city. To make sure he didn't, they blinded him. How's that for gratitude? Whether or not that's true, the clock is an ancient wonder. It tells both Old Czech and Central European time, tracks the movement of stars and planets through the sky, and even helps people keep track of the astrological calendar through its zodiac circle. As if that weren't enough, there are tiny robots positioned around the clock face that appear and interact with the hands and dials of the clock at regular intervals. It's astonishingly elaborate, and although there are other astronomical clocks in Europe, there isn't one that compares to the complexity and beauty of this. The idea of making artificial islands sounds like it should be a fairly new one, but our ancestors thought of it over 1,000 years ago. We know that because of the existence of Nan Madal, a series of ruins on an island of Micronesia, which was once one of the world's great cities. The construction of Nan Madal began somewhere around the 8th century, but the megalithic structures we can still see the remains of now weren't added until 400 years later. The most likely explanation for its construction is that the ruling elite of the Saudalur dynasty wanted an unconventional seat of power in the region, and so had one specially built because they couldn't find one they liked on the land. Archaeologists have been able to identify specific areas within the ancient complex which were used for the preparation of food, the building of small boats, and even the storage of bodies. At its peak, around 1,000 people lived here, although most of them were probably servants. The stone used in the construction is all from the surrounding area, although how it could have been carried out to sea is a secret lost to time. UNESCO finally recognized it as a World Heritage Site in 2019.
Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!